Good morning and welcome to this review of The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany. So I've been wanting to read this book for a while. I was lucky enough to find it late last year. It's famous. It's widely recognized as one of the most influential and acclaimed works of fantasy. And it is described as having been influential on the genre as a whole. And these days, now that we've got 101 subgenres, it is also considered to be the forerunner of fairy tale fantasy and high fantasy. I personally feel that there's other things you could call this other than fantasy, but I'll get to that later. Anyhow, see the black circles under my eyes? That's because I couldn't put it down last night and I stayed up way too late reading it. It is a beautiful book. It is a wow of a book. Calling it 5 out of 5 stars doesn't really do it justice even. So let's start with the plot. The plot, as it were, is that in the small Vale of Earl, the Lord traditionally listens to the counsel of his elders, and a group of, I think it's 8 or 12 elders, come to him and say they've decided they want to bring magic into the Vale. So the old king promptly gets his eldest son and says to him, I'm sending you, his name is Elfland, by the way, I'm sending you off to Elfland. You need to win the King of Elfland's daughter and bring magic to the Vale of Earl, as my elders have said, and I'm sending you now because we know that the time in Elfland goes at a different pace, and I would like you to do this before I die. Okay, so Elfland heads off, but not before he stops by the witch Zerundarel, the witch, this cottage, and says, I'm going to need some protections in Elfland. I've got this marvelous sword that came from my ancestors, but it might not be enough. And she gets him to gather up all these meteorites that have fallen to Earth, and with her magic enchants them so that he's got a magic sword that will be proof against Elfland. So off he goes. He penetrates the Twilight Barrier into Elfland. He sees the Princess of Elfland, the King of Elfland's daughter, titular, who's called Lyrazel, and he does bring her home with him. At that point, there's some beautiful sequencing, because Lyrazel is an elf, and she doesn't understand time. There's no time in her father's kingdom. She doesn't understand humans, and she's come with Elfland, and he keeps wanting her to be human, and she keeps being herself. And she does try. She tries hard to conform to his world, but she doesn't understand when she shouldn't laugh at a funeral. She doesn't understand what a funeral is, for starters. She doesn't understand the value he puts on things, and she doesn't understand the people. But they do have a son, and that causes more friction. And we see this picture of slow friction building up between Elfland and Lyrazel. They both clearly don't want that friction, but neither of them are capable of making it so that it isn't there. And so even the son is a bit of a problem, because he wants him named, and Lyrazel, every name she submits isn't adequate, but they do finally settle on the name of Orion. And Elfland brings the witch of Earl, Zerundarel, to be his nursemaid. So time passes, and the friction between husband and wife grows, and the King of Elfland, back in his kingdom, has spent all these years just missing his daughter and thinking of ways to get her back. So he eventually sends a troll with a rune that will bring her back. But when she receives the rune, she knows what it is, and so she doesn't open it. She puts it aside in the casket. And only sometime, I think a few years later, when she and Elfland have been at particular odds and she's sad and lonely, does she open it, read the rune, and is drawn back to Elfland. At which point, Elfland decides that he's going to go off to get her back, and sets on this quest of many, many years. Orion, in the meantime, grows up into a hunter. So naming him after the hunter of the stars was precognition or something, or anyway, he becomes a hunter, and all we ever learn about him is that he goes around with his dogs hunting things. So during this period, we've got these different POVs, and we skip between them, and we always have the Earl POVs as well. At this point, we start learning more about trolls and a bit of other things of Elfland. Anyhow, long story short, eventually the Princess of Elfland remembers to miss her husband and son, at which point the King of Elfland submits to her requests, and at the end of the book is them reuniting in a very unusual way, which if you haven't read, I don't know that you're going to be able to predict it. I certainly didn't. Now that's the bare bones outline of the King of Elfland's daughter. As I said, incredibly influential. If you look at the list of authors who have been influenced by this book, it reads like a who's who of science fiction and fantasy. It's really quite exceptional. You've got, if you're into Lovecraft, Lovecraft was influenced by him. You've got Robert E. Howard. You've got Tolkien. Tolkien, I'm not sure. There's a rumor out there that I read that he actually bought a works of Lord Dunsany and presented it to the person who was about to edit the Silmarillion. It's a cute story. I don't know if it's true or not. Filmmaker Del Toro, Neil Gaiman, Arthur C. Clarke. You wouldn't think Arthur C. Clarke, who's what you'd think harder science fiction, but apparently Arthur C. Clarke was incredibly influenced by this as well, and has written essays about him. A whole heap about Jack Vance, Michael Moorcock, David Eddings. I can see David Eddings, but I found Jack Vance surprising. Gene Wolfe. It's a who's who. It's a who's who of fantasy, science fiction, and in some cases poetry. And Lord Dunsany was also a poet. He published nearly 100, I think, novels, books, compilations in his lifetime, and more kept on being published after he died. But novels weren't his primary thing. He published a lot of poems, a lot of essays, and a lot of, what's that other thing? Poems, essays, plays. He was writing to plays for a while. Now, King of Elfland's Daughter, initially published in 1924, and it was incredibly influential at the time, apparently, and then fell into obscurity for a while. And it found, again, the wide acclaim and all those amazing SFF authors who fell in love with it was when it was re-released in 1969 as a second volume of the Ballantine Adult Fantasy Series. And my copy is a Ballantine. It's not the 69 one, it's 74. And it's got this nice cover by Sweet. I'm pretty sure it was by Sweet. Daryl Sweet, that's right. And I quite like that what they did with this cover. They've got this cameo from the front on the back. So it's a good book in not too bad condition for me. It's taken me a week to read it, so it spent a week living in bags and cars and stuff, and it survived. With that second edition, it kind of became cemented into mythology. And I think it's been republished by Masterworks as well, someone said. There is so much to this book. There's so much that can be said. One thing I'll say, Lord Dunsany himself was quite fascinating. He was an Anglo-Irish member of the Irish peerage. Apparently, as Lord Dunsany, however you call that peerage thing, and that's one of the oldest, most influential, and importantly, wealthiest peerages left in Ireland when he was born, which was in 1878. And that was important because he wasn't a professional author. He was a professional peer. But that gave him a lot of money, so he was a contributor to theatres and art societies. And his story would actually be a fascinating one. If no one's written a biblio on him, it would be amazing. He sounds like a really interesting man. He hobnobbed with poets. And he served in a couple of world wars, if I'm not mistaken. Really interesting story. One of the things I found interesting about him is his mother's name. His mother, like most people in the peerage, is well supplied with names, but one of her last names is Earl, E-R-L-E. And the two places that this book occurs in are mostly Elfland itself and the Valley of Earl, E-R-L. So I think it's just cute that he used one of his mum's many names as the site of this book. So, look, that's it for Lord Dunsany. Sorry. This is a gorgeous book. The bare bones plot fails to really describe adequately the experience of reading it because the actual writing is so beautiful. Which leads me to my opinion, which may be controversial, but is my opinion, that calling this fantasy is not quite on the mark. Now, these days we've got a title of fairy tale fantasy, but this is far more actual fairy tale than it is fantasy. You could possibly even call it epic poetry. And that will tie into the people who like or don't like this book, I think. But open this book anywhere and start reading, and you will find the most beautiful prose. Here, let's try it. Randomly. Chapter 5, The Wisdom of the Parliament of Erle. In those bridal days, the men of Erle came often to the castle, bringing gifts and felicitations, and in the evenings they would talk in their houses of the fair things that they hoped for from the Vale of Erle, on account of the wisdom of the thing that they had done when they spoke with the old lord in his long red room. Beautiful. Because this is worth mentioning. These people who wanted to bring magic to the kingdom, it wasn't for personal gain. It was because they loved their land and they wanted it to be known overseas. And in order for that to happen, they mused various options, but they knew that a place with magic always brings in other people. They wanted other people to know the beauty of their vales, see how well built their houses were. They wanted to be famous. And because of that, and as the author coyly says, without thinking of the repercussions, they asked for magic to come. When it came, it wasn't really what they expected. One huge full moon one summer had shone all warm night long on a lad as he lay in the hay, and after that he had guessed or seen things that he had said the moon showed him. Whether there were none, whatever they were, none else saw any such things in Erle. He's one of the ones who joins Elric's band when he goes looking for Elfland. And here, I want to segue into why I think this is fairy tale and not fantasy. So, fantasy, especially epic fantasy, which this is meant to be a forerunner of, does specific things. It creates characters. It creates quests. It makes the characters do things for reasons that may or may not seem good to us, but are explicable to us and are comprehensible to them. There is a narrative, there are clear intentions, and Tolkien did it beautifully. On the other hand, fairy tales aren't really about characters. Fairy tales are about the subconscious knowledge of a society, and is a story with no clear narrative and often not really strong characters, which reaffirms the beliefs of that society and is used to carry on the traditions under the underlying motifs of people to other people. It's a way of sharing your society and reinforcing your own belief in it. A lot of the people I've seen who didn't love this book read it because one of their favourite authors mentions that it is a great book, and so they go out and read all the sources that influence this author that they love. And it's interesting how these things are cycling. These days you've got J.R.R. Martin and you've got Robert Jordan, and about 10 years ago they were the people that were being interviewed about who influenced them. These days they're the people who are influencing the new generation of writers. So it's really cool to see that. But when it comes to someone who loves J.R.R. Martin, I'm pretty sure was influenced by Lord Dunsany as well. If you love J.R.R. Martin or Robert Jordan, the chances of you being able to get into this cadence may not be high. And that is because if you love epic fantasy, this isn't really that way. It reads far more like a fairy tale. All these interesting characters and the events that I've told you about are completely secondary to the beautiful writing. And this is writing that you need to read like poetry. So when I read poetry, my brain feels like it's doing something different to what it's doing when I read science or when I read fiction for fun. Poetry requires a suspension of analysis, for me it does anyway, and just letting the beautiful words roll over you. And that is really the main way that you can sink into the King of Elfland's daughter and enjoy it. If you're sitting there trying to analyze characters, like I was when I started, then you're going to run into issues. It's like, sure, put it down, think about the question of a man and his wife and what they fight over and how hard it is for them to come to agreement, even if one of them doesn't come from Elfland. Think about that. But while you're reading it, you need to just let the beautiful sonorous words flow over you, like you would if you were reading Wordsworth or Eliot. Unless, of course, you're a literature student, in which case I think you have to analyse them. But I never was. Now, if you like reading epic poetry, like the Odyssey or the Kalevala or the Poetic Edda, I guess, you probably have the reading style in your toolbox, as it were, to enjoy this book as well. But if you specifically want that epic fantasy with characters and narrative and a strong dissection of people's internal monologues and motifs, I don't think you're going to find it here. Chirp, chirp. Hold that thought. I'm bird-ridden. Say hello, Reapy Cheep. Well, Miller flies around madly and lands on my head. Yes. So, characterization in this book is fairy tale-like. If you think of Little Red Riding Hood, Little Red Riding Hood is a great story. But Little Red Riding Hood isn't a character. Not a character like we see them in, I don't know, Wheel of Time. What she is a symbol of innocence. The wood is a symbol of the subconscious. Innocence meeting darkness. A quest that is shadowed in darkness. Little Red Riding Hood can be as many things as the reader wants it to be. It can be analysed and it's been redone into movies. There's a lot being done with it. And it's Company of Wolves. That's the one I was thinking of. And it's usually great because it has these underlying motifs. And this has those underlying motifs, but it isn't presenting them in the way of strong characterizations that many more modern readers come to expect. And so I have seen a few reviews of people who really didn't like The King of Elfland's Daughter. They were confused by the lack of characterization. They didn't know how to read this narrative. And perhaps some of them didn't really understand the way that you read a book purely for the beauty of the writing and you let the story sink in. So, and how the horns of Elfland blew over the barrier of twilight, to be heard by any ear in the fields we know, I cannot understand. Yet Tennyson speaks of them as heard faintly blowing, even in those fields of ours, and I believe that by accepting all that the poets say, well duly inspired, our errors will be fewest. So though science may deny or confirm it, Tennyson's line shall guide me here. That's one of the few references Lord Dunsany actually makes in this book to anything relevant and modern, and it's Tennyson, it's a poet, and I think you can learn a lot from that fact. Yes, so poetry is how it reads. Oh, wow. Why did I get birds? Why didn't I get an axolotl? Okay, poetry, yes. Oh, yes. Heralding back to fantasy and fiction writers and modern fantasy and fiction readers and what they expect from that experience. I think if you're used to reading things from the 1920s, you probably will enjoy much about this. But possibly depending on the type of thing you read, because I don't think this is typical 1920s. I think that's why it was so very influential when it came out. I think it was extraordinary even for its time. Extraordinarily beautiful, extraordinarily poetic, extraordinary fairy tale. And this is turning into a comedy club. Oh, okay. 20s, extraordinary. Yes, absolutely. This is an extraordinary book. But, content warning. Orion becomes a hunter. One of the things he hunts is unicorns. If you are of the mentality that unicorns are these beautiful magical creatures, if your unicorn pharmacology is basically that of Harry Potter, that they're wonderful magical creatures, and anyone who kills a unicorn anyone who kills a unicorn has to be an evil Dark Lord, then you're not going to love Orion, because unicorns die in this. And not for any reason that we would think of as a particularly good reason either. And that's another point at which it's worth remembering, that in the 1920s we hadn't developed our modern fantasy world, and unicorns were already a symbol of purity. If you go through the older stories, they're not always that great, and they're not always treated with the respect that you, as a younger person who grew up on Harry Potter, may expect. So, content warning for unicorns dying. What else? There is so much in this. So yes, who is this for? This is for people who really, really are fascinated by the origins of fantasy writing and want to read the origins of things that were influential, because this has been incredibly influential, apparently. In two waves, but still lasting now. It is perfect for anyone who loves reading epic poetry. If you have read a lot of epic poetry and you're looking for a new one, I think this will be just your cup of tea. It is such a beautiful book, and I do want people to enjoy it. I want more people to read it. I want more people to enjoy it. But it isn't going to be for you. If you think that Malazan or Akatar is the height of epic fantasy, I think maybe wait a couple of decades before reading this. You might come to it slowly. Anyway, The King of Elfland's Daughter by the amazing Lord Dunsany, who I hope someone does actually write a story, because it sounds amazing. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Read good books. I would strongly recommend to the committed SFF reader, one day read this book when you're in the right mood, but read this book. It's just stunning. Now, the birds have been calling me. Have a great day.